privatize. The vision that they had for Tanzania from AgriSol. I'm sorry I didn't get these slides up there, but it's big crop production. Big John Deere logo, seed company logos, in a huge field with a number of tractors in it. Their vision for Tanzania, factory farm agriculture, with all the corporations that are going to be making money down there. It's ethanol and energy companies. They're going to make millions and millions of dollars there. The vision they had Iowa State helping them. Ultimately, AgriSol Energy's vision for Tanzania in this project was a bunch of corporate logos. This is from their PowerPoint. But that's not our vision. And ultimately, while they might have more money, they are working themselves into places of influence, points of influence. We know that our vision will trump because we have more people. And now I'm going to turn it over to folks who are going to talk about our vision.
Well, I'm a family farmer, and I don't believe that the vision of our nation's agriculture or the vision of any nation's agriculture has to be the same as corporate agribusiness. Horace Greeley wrote that above all professions he would recommend farming to his son. Among his reasons is that farming is, quote, the vocation which conduces most directly to the reverence of honesty and truth. And my sons are in the audience. I haven't exactly recommended it. And back in the days of the farm crisis, there was a joke about, what do you call it when you turn the farming operation over to your children? Child abuse. Yeah. But for Thomas Jefferson, he extolled the value of the yeoman farmer. The yeoman farmer owned his own land. He was financially independent and resourceful, and he didn't have to worry about speaking up because he wouldn't be losing customers like small business people. So I'm very lucky to be a family farmer that owns his own land, and that's one reason I try to speak out freely, and I really appreciate this opportunity today. Very few family farmers today own most of their land. I would say on the average it's about 20%. So they still have to worry about offending landlords and bankers. And our agricultural system didn't need to be like this, where we have so few family farmers that can't speak out, where we have corn and soybeans from horizon to horizon that will be drenched with chemicals, where livestock is owned by corporations and confined in big feeding lots. No, it didn't have to be. And let's see here. I am lost in my notes here. Well, anyway, it doesn't have to be this way. If our land-grant colleges had been telling the truth all along, the people of the United States would not have stood for this. This isn't the first time I've criticized a university regent that was appointed by Governor Branstad. Back some 10 years ago or so, Tom Dorr was appointed by Branstad to be a member of the Regents, and then he was nominated by George W. Bush to be an Undersecretary of Agriculture for Rural Development. And he said he hoped someday he would have a farm of 225,000 acres. Well, Iowa CCI and the National Family Farm Coalition opposed his appointment. Not only was his vision of farming wrong, he had misrepresented his operation to the USDA in order to receive government payments that he did not deserve. I testified against him in Washington, D.C., along with the director of the Leopold Center, and it was reported that he would go to the Leopold Center and harangue the staff at that center as that their work was a waste of time and money. Now that clearly is not academic freedom. Academic freedom obviously involves honesty and truth. I mean, we pay our taxes so professors and students can examine ideas to their fullest and report to our society what they think, not what Rastetter or Terry Branstad or the CEO of Monsanto or Pioneer think. I think the lack of and our students need to be taught how to think and not what to think. And they should be able to follow their thinking regardless of how unpopular their final conclusions might be. some evidence I have of the lack of academic freedom at ISU. I was asked several times to speak at one of their biotechnology retreats. And the one time I spoke on the ethics of international trade. And at one point we got all around a table for a discussion, and somebody mentioned academic freedom, and all the people around the table worked at ISU, and when that term was mentioned, everybody went, So it was pretty clear that there was no academic freedom regarding biotechnology at ISU. And over the years, I've had many discussions and debates and confrontations with agricultural economists at ISU. One thing you could always count on was their promotion of free market fundamentalism. Whenever you pointed out the problems for agriculture of that, such as consolidation of farms, the abuse of the land, they would always get defensive. And then when you pointed out, get them basically in a corner and tell them that, in fact, we had the law of the land that would have prevented all of this, then they would say, oh, well, you're talking about socialism. Even though it was the law of the land, parity was the law of this land from 1941 to 1953. And that's why you often hear about Norman Borlaug, but you almost never hear about Henry Wallace. In fact, that when you go back to around 1953, in the Cold War McCarthyism is to blame for a lot of this lack of knowledge of the American people on what makes agriculture tick and what was at stake. The Iowa Farmers Union, the New England Farmers Union, and the New Jersey Farmers Union lost their charters because they would not go along with the free market theory that Ezra Taft Benson was promoting. So you have to understand that under a free market where farmers are competing against each other, they will be trying to be the last one standing. And therefore they will not cut back production. Conservation is very difficult. And actually, the winners are the exploiters of the land and labor today at the expense of future generations. And on an international scale, you have countries competing or farmers competing. So you think that a small farmer in Tanzania can compete with the technology that we use or with the attitude that we have about, well, hell, we're losing our biodiversity? Geez, so what? You know? And then there's also the free market development hoax. And that is our people from this country, especially with USAID, lots of times in cahoots with people from the universities, land-grant universities, go over to these small farmers and say, well, they say several things. One is, you're just not big enough. You can't make a living on 4 or 5 or 10 acres, you know? Well, I was always able to tell farmers around the world, look, in the United States, they tell you if you're farming 2,000 acres, you're not farming enough. So, and then there was always new markets. Oh, you're always going to make new markets. So maybe it's guavas or papayas or whatever. And so the farmers would go, wow, yeah, I'm really going to make money. They would go in debt and get all set up to raise these crops. Well, they weren't told that USAID was telling every other farmer in every other Central American country and Mexico and maybe over in Asia to also raise those very same crops. So by the time they got their crop, the price of those fruits was almost zero. And so they would end up losing their farms, which resulted in more consolidation. And now you got the Rastetter model where you just come in and take all kinds of land and you farm without farmers. And that, I guess, is supposed to be freedom. But obviously it's not. Now, I want to touch on a couple other things. And that's the organizations like commodity organizations that claim to represent farmers and work hand in hand with the researchers at land-grant universities. They'll take our money, my money. They'll take every farmer's money from the checkoffs. and use that money for research that's actually for the benefit of agribusiness and not family farmers. When I sell the soybeans off of 1 acre of soybeans, I have to pay $25 to the checkoff. That's more than what I get in a direct payment from the government in this, you know, the talk about subsidies going to farmers. I put in more to the American Soybean Association than what I get from the direct payment from the farm program. And that money will be used against me and against other farmers around the world. And one of the ideas that is being promoted by the biotech companies and our land-grant universities is that if we can increase production, we're going to solve hunger. And we don't have to take into account the cost to the environment or the cost to our society, evidently. Okay, and the other thing is, if we increase the yield on each acre of land that we do farm, well, then we won't have to bring land into production in the rainforest or in the savanna of Brazil. Well, that's just absolutely wrong. Because if you can make it cheaper to raise bushels on an acre of land, that means that more marginal land can be brought into production. It'll be economical. Okay, well, so my time's running out. And all I can say is we have to ask, what kind of world do we want? What will we do for future generations? We really know where everything is leading to today, and we can't go that direction anymore. If the agribusiness vision of the world is not what we want, then we will have to have big changes at this university and in our government. And as for me, if our institutions can't get us to a better time, then we should just not support them anymore. As a taxpayer, I'd just rather actually close this university down than have it miseducate and misinform our people. Thanks.
Thank you, George. Next, we'll go over to Francis Thicke.
It's always nice to follow George because then you don't sound so radical. When, you know, we've heard about the Morrill Act that created the land-grant universities in 1862. And when President Abraham Lincoln signed that act, I'll read one sentence from his statement. He said, "The land-grant university is being built on behalf of the people who have invested in these public universities their hopes, their support, and their confidence." So on behalf of the people, we've invested our hopes, our support, and our confidence. So how's that working for us? Clearly our confidence has been compromised here. But I think our hopes are alive. As Paul said, our land-grant university system has a proud history. But it's going to be difficult to reclaim that again, I think. Our support, as we saw from David's presentation, 40% loss of funding in 10 years. It just, I didn't know it was that bad. It's amazing. And so we can see why in that vacuum, why the industry stepped in. And for people who don't really know how that happens, how private money takes over the university, well, our public money, state and federal, pays for the land-grant university infrastructure, the buildings and the laboratories and the professors' base salaries. And then along comes the industry with the matching grant. We'll give you half if you give us half back in matching. And so that leverages part of that infrastructure. And then another corporation. Pretty soon now we're getting to the point where we've got the whole institution being leveraged to do private work. And so our public monies are going in that direction. And now it's a great deal for the industry, for the corporations, because now they can do their research for half price and they can get the best researchers in the world to do it for them. And it turns out that in the short term, the university thinks it's a good deal for them, and the researchers think it's a good deal for them because they're getting more money. The money's gone from the public. They have to get it somewhere, so you know, they're looking for it. So it's in the short term, it's a good deal, they think, for them. But it's a bad deal for us. And so how are we going to get to that? You know, there's a striking parallel that I read something recently, it just shocked me, from the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, who was talking about how private monies have leveraged the research and the whole medical industry. And she said, It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. So, as Paul said, should we continue on this journey? I mean, we're going in the wrong direction, and George is ready to chalk it all in here, it looks like. But I think there is hope. And Paul also said that sometimes a little money can leverage a lot. And one example I'll give is organic farming research. You know, the USDA budget for research is about $2 billion annually. Well, it's only about 2003 that some little bit of money, $5 million, got into the budget for agriculture in USDA for organic farming research. Before that, the researchers in agriculture thought this was really marginal, and anybody who did research in this area was kind of a kook. Suddenly now there's money, and so everybody's kind of lining up for it. Now there's about $15 million of research and monies for organic agriculture. And it's made a big impact. And Iowa State here, Kathleen Dellett's done some great research, and so that little bit of money can make a big difference. And so we need to work on that. And also, the legislation was very clear that it had to be for organic research, and the request for proposal came out and said the research had to be done on certified organic land. And so I sat on some of the panels to review the research proposals, and it was very stringently enforced. So we can take a piece of it and make it work. Now, how are we going to take bigger pieces? We have to work at that. And I think that if we look internationally, we see some of these same parallels going on here. Ed talked about a new wave of imperialism. Well, you know, I see it as really corporate colonialism. You know, people talk about neo-colonialism, like China and other countries grabbing land around the world to feed themselves. But now here we have AgriSol, a private corporation grabbing land. This is corporate colonialism. And it's really not just in the developing world. Look at our seed industry. One corporation, Monsanto, controls the genes for 80 to 90% of the crops planted in Iowa. I mean, this is a colonial corporation it's going across the whole world, that they're slowly sneaking in and taking control of that. If you look around the world, there are about 1.5 billion small farmers with about 2 hectares or less of land. And these are the ones that are in big trouble when this happens, that they get displaced and undermined. And I think that today's land grabs really are like the Green Revolution on steroids. We've heard about the Green Revolution, and it's been touted as increasing food production around the world, and it has, with the industrial model. However, new surveys by scientists looking at it have found some incredible unintended consequences: extensive soil erosion, loss of soil fertility, depletion of water tables around the world, land loss through salinization, increased pest resistance, social disruption, displacement of small farmers. This is the unintended consequence when we come in with one thing in mind, just big production, and we forget about the environmental and the social side of things. And a few years ago, the UN and the World Bank and other organizations put together a big team of 400 scientists from 80 countries looking at how can we reduce hunger and poverty around the world. And they talked about this, how we've gone in the wrong direction with the Green Revolution. We need to look at agriculture as multifunctional. It's not just production. They said it needs to consider, when we're doing this international development, we have to consider production, but also human health, cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, local resources, natural resource management, and landscape resilience, trade and markets. Who's going to profit from this? And the role of women in agriculture, which is very important in developing countries. And so this is where we have to go. And then also in 2008, the United Nations did a group of scientists funded by UN analyzed 144 projects around in 24 African countries. And they found that those using the model of organic agriculture, an ecological model that, as Carolyn said, brings more diversity in, that they were able to improve yields twice that of other methods were being used. And the study found that those farms had improved soil fertility compared to the decreased in the Green Revolution, better retention of water and resistance to drought. They concluded that, quote, the evidence presented in this study supports the argument that organic agriculture can be more conducive to food, I have the wrong page here, and the recreational value of the landscape, the nutritional value of the food we produce, and the welfare of animals, the effects of farming on practices on air and water quality, and wildlife habitat. So this contributed to the long-term sustainability. So in conclusion, I think that what we need to do is, as I think Ed said, we need to use this AgriSol crisis as an impetus to do something. And the first step, as Ed said, is create an ethics for Iowa State University for policy and international work. That's one thing that we can do. And the second thing is to take back that research agenda. And it's not going to be easy. And I think Paul said that too. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be, we're up against a big challenge. But it's going to take a lot of increase in public investment and a lot of involvement. We're going to have to make it happen every step, or it's just not going to happen. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank everyone for coming again, and thank you for giving your great presentations. One question would be, they keep talking about creating these ethics for the universities, for humanitarian efforts overseas and here. What does that look like? What would these ethics look like? How do you go about doing that?
I'm going to answer that coming in at it sideways. Because one of the things that I've heard from all of us is resistance to the current approaches that are used by Iowa State University and most of the public land grant institutions. And I would submit to you that it actually emerges out of our the prevailing philosophy about what government is for, what our public institutions are for. And you know, the debate even here about whether we should abolish the university or not, because it's essentially going against all public interest or many public interest values, or whether it's redeemable, we don't agree maybe here. And I would submit that it's because the vision of government right now is that it is to promote the economy, and that its primary agenda, and that it's because the market will take care of our problems. The market will take care of environmental problems. The market will take care of public health problems. But I think we would agree that that has failed. And so until we come up with a comprehensive and compelling moral and ethical vision of government and public institutions, we can't fold the university in. So if you agree with me that the primary function of government is to serve as the trustee, not the owner, the trustee of the Commonwealth and the common health for present and future generations, then you have an idea of what the university should be doing. It is not to make Iowa rich. It is to make Iowa healthy. It is to make it beautiful. It is to make it resilient. It is to strengthen community in this state. That's very different than making it rich.
We ought to baby drill again and go back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and on into the 60s. Land-grant universities sent their ag extension people overseas, and I'm sure that some of them went for motives that we wouldn't particularly care about, but most, I think, went to actually help and work side by side with farmers in the developing world. David and I both served in the Peace Corps, maybe some of the rest of you did as well. Those ag extension agents, when they came back, were not the same people. They were real citizens. And I know our ag extension agent up in Winnebago County when I started farming 38 years ago was just a marvelous person, but he had spent a year in Iran. And he wanted to share those ideas with us. And we had that feeling back then that we're doing the public good, even overseas in that case. I know some will argue maybe we shouldn't have given them new hybrid seeds or something, but the point was they really, I think their heart was in it. If one of you wants to do a good research project, go back and look at that, and we maybe don't have to reinvent the wheel, but at the very least, looking back on our history and where we've come from, there's a lot of very noble things that went on. And the first scientist in the Soil Conservation Service went over to work with Israel when they first began in 1948. And still today, there are people in Israel that say, give us your louder milk, not your powder milk. In other words, we really want this good science, and we gave it way back then. We were the first to do soil surveys in China and set up their soil survey program, and did the same in Latin America. And it wasn't neocolonialism or colonialism. It was a real feeling that we we had a responsibility for our local communities and our local farmers, but also a responsibility for the world. So,
May I say that
Can you use the microphone, Chris? Thanks.
I'm Chris Henning, and last March I went to Uganda. And Iowa State is doing some things right, and AgriSol isn't one of them, okay? But there is a Ugandan extension, ISU extension. The Center for Rural Communities are working with small women landowners and farmers, and there are projects like Paul just mentioned going on that we need to support those and also speak out against the big ones like Bruce Rastetter. So thanks for listening.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'd just like to say that values is an important thing to consider. Where are our values coming? Are they just the values of corporations that think that making as much money as you can is good for all of us? Or are we going to be thinking about the least of these? The reality is that the globalization, the free trade agreements that have prevented other countries from having their own agricultural policy has been devastating to the least of these in all of those countries. And in response, the International Peasant Movement and Family Farm Movement, of which National Family Farm Coalition was a member, has tried to elevate the concept of food sovereignty so that every country can have its own agricultural policy that respects its values and respects its environmental concerns and its traditions, and also the distribution of economic opportunity. And there's a book that's just come out from Food First. It's called Food Movements Unite, and it will talk about food sovereignty and will help you think through what the whole globalization has done and how farmers all around the world are uniting on food sovereignty. And I just recommend this book.
I would just like to add, too, that I think, going back to kind of how Ed kicked it off, that, we're in the middle of this right now, the middle of this AgriSol deal and taking Francis and Carolyn's challenge. I'd like to turn it back to you. I think this event, there's over 150 people here that are interested in this, that care about this, that have a sense of what that vision should be, what those values are that should determine that, and what the next step should be. I would put it back to you to stand up and take action, because it is going to take an investment not only of funds to restore our education system, but an investment of our time, an investment of our effort to make this happen, to organize and to bring people together, to continue building off what you've all done here today.
Chris, do you have a question? Shelley, can you get the mic up here?
I just have a couple of comments, okay?
Can you wait for the mic?
Or just hop up. Yeah, go for it.
Just a couple of comments. I've been a family farmer all my life. I've fought the good fight for 20-some years on behalf of rural America and family farms. Okay, let's talk about the opposition and the success of Farm Bureau and the commodity groups combined with Iowa State and the corporate gang. What used to be called mainstream agriculture is now considered niche or alternative. That's what they've done to us. 92% of the independent pork producers over the last 25 years are gone. They're history. We got just as many hogs in this state, and we're depending on exports to keep that alive, corporate agriculture, hog production. And we're going to win this thing. And one of the main drivers of this is going to be the cost of energy. For once, the cost of energy is going to drive sustainability, and it's going to drive localization and regionalization of the food system. It's coming, big time. And I ask all you, as Adam said, get involved, It's not only about family farms and the environment, it's about the food system. I'm sure you all heard the stories about pink slime. Yeah. People are waking up, and we need to spread the word, because I want family farms to survive, and I want them to feed this country. And by God, if these land grants don't want to clean up and straighten up and go along with us, let's leave them behind.
Does anyone want to respond to those statements? Go for it.
Yeah, maybe this is a way of tying this together. It's much easier to fight a fight when it is in your backyard. And that's one reason we need groups like CCI, like the group Matt's with. All these organizations are fighting the fights that are close to home, that affect people on a daily basis, and it's so important that we do that. But the wonderful thing about this horrible situation in Tanzania, the wonderful opportunity in this, is that we can do what's right for ourselves, for our own environment, for our own farmers, for our own communities, while doing something that's really, really important to a handful of people who are just living on the margins of life and really don't have a lot of voice. We can help be their voice. Iowans have a long history of that. With the resettlement efforts of the refugees from Vietnam under the Bob Ray administration. You can think of so many different cases in which Iowans have been on the forefront of providing hospitality and justice to people in other parts of the world who came here, or in other cases, in some cases where we just actively put out to help them in their time of need. This is a really good opportunity to combine that element of our history, that type of passion and compassion that Iowans are famous for, that Midwesterners are famous for, and to do what's right for ourselves while helping people who are really in need of the resources, the energy, the time, the passion that we have to offer.
I want to just say one thing before we end, and that is that there are students here who really did put some of their academic lives and their on the line. And you need to know as an audience that Iowa State University is not making the student organizers' lives easy. So be witnesses, be support, have their back, because that's the first step in challenging the corporate interests. They will make their lives hell. Don't let them. We're in this together.
Ma'am, sorry. We're going to try and stick with the mics. So there's someone behind you.
Thanks.
And then we'll get it to you.
This was really a great discussion today. I grew up on a small farm. I'm now retired. I got driven out of the hog business by Iowa State and their vision of vertical integration. But I grew up in the 40s when parity was in full swing. I didn't understand it, but my dad did. He lost $3,000 when the banks closed, but he was able to crawl back and buy the farm, paid cash for it in 1952 because of parity, which George is talking about. And that should be a discussion about having a basis for our farm production and solid conservation. I'm looking around at some of the most atrocious farming practices today that I've ever seen in my life. No waterways. Grass strips are now being destroyed for corn. We send corn down there to Mexico and drove those little farmers out of business. And now they come up here, and now we want to build a wall. That's what we're doing. That's the philosophy of dog-eat-dog capitalism, and it's the greatest criminal enterprise that ever walked the planet. And
thank you.
Now we're going to go into Africa. It's a dark nation, all right, because there's no electricity there. They're going to be exploited so much it's pathetic. China's gone in there, Saudi Arabia's gone in there, and America's gone in there to exploit those people like they've never been exploited before. And we got to somehow make connections, like we make connections with the small farmer in Mexico. It's time that we form coalitions. The United Nations ought to have an international minimum wage, ought to have international workplace laws, international environmental laws, international ethics on farms. I mean, that's what our UN representative ought to be railing for, but we're not doing it. But here, I get fired up with people like you around here. I love coming to places like this because I feel very encouraged when I see people standing up and wanting to fight like hell to stop some of this stuff.
My question is to the panelists who have children where do you send them to school? Where do you send them now that want to be farmers? Do you send them to Iowa State? Do the professors teach them what you want them to learn, or do they get involved in this biochemical and the technology that you don't believe in? Where do you send your kids?
Well, I don't have any children, but I want to say that Iowa State has some very good professors, some of them sitting in here, and it's really improved in some. It's sort of gone two ways. I mean, when I was a graduate student in the 1980s, you couldn't mention organic. Even to say sustainable agriculture, you were just about thrown out of class. And so things have changed, and there are classes in sustainability. So there are places you can find your way now, and you have to bring it from home too, maybe. But I think you can. You know, they're part of the change. The students are. So I don't want to give up on education at Iowa State.
You know, a meeting like this is great because, as Larry said, he likes to get mad with a lot of other people who are mad, and so do I. We have to have some targets, and because there are too many things all going on at once. And I sort of think about ourselves as maybe the year before I was born, 1942. It was pretty grim. And if you looked at 1942 and said, we're kind of in trouble here, you'd be describing what we just described in this room. We are in some trouble. But persevering, you can come out of it. And one of the places I think to begin is to look at funding for this institution. It is so much lower now than it's ever been before that it is so obvious that somebody that is one of these Tea Party budget cutters has no idea what that person is really doing. You got to confront them. You have to look at electoral politics because that still is a place to work. And the other thing you have to remember, and that's the reason I told the story about my dean, Jim Merchant, it's individuals who stand up that actually make the difference. Lest we look at this thing and say, Jesus, I felt good in that meeting and now I just feel depressed, which is often the way I leave one of these meetings. You got to know that there are individuals out there who continue to fight, and what Carolyn said about the students here, we better make sure that we do have their back. Because if they start fooling with people who want to bring more openness, who want to exercise their intellectual curiosity, because it doesn't seem to fit with somewhat some of the funders of Iowa State want to do, and we let that go, then we aren't doing our jobs as citizens. It's our job as citizens. We got to vote. We got to get rid of a bunch of bad people. Unfortunately, we're from Ames here, and everybody's good. So it's got to be hard to vote out the bastards because they aren't here. They're other places. But you got to figure out how you're going to go after those people who have decided that it's much better to have corporate tax breaks than it is to fund universities. That's fundamentally wrong. That's wrong. Unelect those people.
Hi, I'm a farmer, retired, north of here, about 12 miles. My neighbors farm 14,000 acres. I think it's 2 boys or so, with about 3 yellow cats and 1 green one. And but they haven't given up with that. They'd like to farm 20. They'd like to farm 20. And they've learned it all here from Iowa State. And they got plenty of red meat to come up to their place 15 miles away to run these tractors day and night, day and night. to do the job or to buy it. Then they have the funds to buy it. They can buy it, rent it, borrow it, or whatever. And I also have seen more farm places, one of which I worked on all along, burnt up this year because the place is not worth a damn anymore. It's not worth saving. Only thing that's worth saving is a 3-story house and a garage, and that's it. Now they burnt up the crib, which also should be a little investigation done, but because it was insured. But other things too. They don't give a frank damn about anything that we did in the past. Not a damn bit. And you can't count on. I lived 1 mile apart for 70 years, and you cannot. I don't know the neighbors. Of course, it's my fault too. But the damn neighbors, you know, it's their fault too. But, oh, and by the way, the bad people over there, Davis, is at Iowa U. That's where the bad people are. 3.8 million for the coach is probably enough. So, Rastetter, we have to get rid of.
Yes.
I don't know how many of us are here for that reason, but that's the reason I am. We have to put him down and get rid of him. And that's all. They're not work with him like the Ames senator said. To work with him, oh, hell yes, we'll work with him. Some bitch, he'll just throw up a few more bucks and they'll work with it. We need to get rid of it. He hasn't done much good for us up in Hardin County.
Thank you. I think that'll be our last question. But I wanted to open it up to the panelists to have a closing statement. 1 or 2 sentences for the next steps or a call to action that you feel you'd like to share at this moment in closing.
I already did mine.
I haven't spoken. So as an organizer for a nonprofit organization, I would say get politically involved. There's a growing food movement. People know that our food system is broken. A handful of corporations control it, and there are many ways to address it. Get involved in groups like CCI, get involved in Food and Water Watch, Iowa Farmers Union, and so on and so forth. So get involved.
He just did my pitch, but I've got one more. There's a postcard like this out on the table, or you can get one from me. Saturday, April 14th, a statewide summit to confront corporate power. Coalitions of groups across the country have a goal of training 100,000 new activists. Folks in here can be part of that. Saturday, April 14th, down in Des Moines.
I'd like to say that we all need to write letters to the editor. That sounds silly, but we need to educate a lot of people out there. All of us activists know about this stuff, but the rest of the people would be just as shocked and outraged as we are if they only knew about it. Another thing is, if you'd like to learn about food sovereignty, there's a U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, and you can go to their website. It's just usfoodsovereigntyalliance.org. And finally, I know we can't be a judge and jury here, but from my point of view, on its face, it seems like Bruce Rastetter ought to resign. And if he doesn't do that, our legislator ought to hold hearings where Bruce Rastetter and Wendy Winterstein are called to testify under oath about what's really gone on in this institution.
I think it's important that we take what we've learned today and swing our weight around. I can do that better than most of you probably, since I have more of it. But on the other hand, I think we need to, when we see people doing good, we need to tell them thank you too. There's some very good people at Iowa State University. The teaching faculty and many of the researchers are giving their lives to doing really good work. They're not on the side we've been talking about here today. They maybe don't speak up on these issues even, but you know who they are, many of you. And they don't get thanked very often, and I urge you to do so. So take on those that we disagree with, but again, do it in a civil and honest discussion, but also say thank you to those who have done so much good. I thank the people of Iowa State over the years who have, I want to give them thanks for the good work they've done. And I've got 6 granddaughters, and I wouldn't mind any of them coming to Iowa State and working like the students who are here working today to help change it and make it a better place. So.
I would just say, too, that Iowa State has some great things, as I mentioned, and Iowa State had the first organic specialist in the nation, and it has a great sustainable agriculture graduate program, so some great things. And in Iowa in general, we have some great things going on in agriculture, local food production, and it's not all just about big farms. The story you had about the thousands of acres of farm reminds me of the Amish farmer who moved into a neighborhood, and his neighbor farmed 5,000 acres, and they were talking over the fence one day, and the guy with the 5,000 acres, and the Amish farmer bought 80 acres. And the 5,000 acre guy said, "How can you make a living? You sure you can make a living on 80 acres? And the Amish guy said, "I'm not sure if I can make it on 80 acres, but I know I can make it on 40.
Two things. First, I would invite Occupy, both Iowa State and Ames, to begin putting together some of the ideas that you've heard here. What would your vision of Iowa State be? What kind of public interest research agenda could you see? Could you imagine a funding methods and program for Iowa State for the things you wanted? What is your theory of government? Could we begin to articulate that here and be a model for the rest of the state? And for in building in ideas into the Occupy movement. And the second thing and last thing is, thank you, Angie, for the work that you did in organizing this. If I was ever hiring, I would want to have you work for me. You are just extraordinary. And what I have seen out of all of you is really remarkable. So I thank you and say that I have hope, not in the sense of optimism that everything's going to turn out all right, but in the sense of Václav Havel, who said, hope is the deep orientation of the soul towards what is right. And I don't even think hope is enough now. I think it really is a matter of grace. And that orientation of each of us towards what is right, the deep orientation of our soul, but knowing that there are more than just me, knowing that there are so many in this room that have our compass points of our soul turned towards what is right, means that there's grace, that there will be a tipping point of good things because of what you do. And Angie, today you are my role model.
I have a couple of announcements I've been asked to make. KHOI Community Radio, which isn't on the air yet, it'll be on the air August 7th, and they've been allowing us to meet in their building, the old Pantorium. They will be having a fundraiser on May 1st with Arnie Arneson, political commentator, and with Stephen Schmidt at the Octagon to help build the station, to raise more funds to get it up and going. So that will be May 1st at the Octagon. Also, of course, I want to announce that Occupy Ames continues to meet every Friday night out by the War Memorial on 5th and Grand at 5:15. We do our vigil there. Come out and enjoy being honked at and told to get a job. We need you. And then we also meet, we have our General Assembly on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. at the Pantorium, the KHOI building. Come in if you're just curious about what's going on there. Come and join us. We're a great, fun group. So also on our blog that I mentioned earlier, the After AgriSol Occupy Teachin.blogspot.com, we will have a section that you can get even more inspiration called What is Our Vision? So I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. You're all fantastic. And hopefully not only have you learned something today, but you get out and do something. Thank you.